Right, Duncan, should we let's get into how this coffee's actually made then? Because I actually had someone message me before we actually started recording saying how do they make that coffee so strong? They were like really intrigued to how, because people just assume that coffee is one strength. You make it and it just comes out that strength. And obviously you've got you got the strongest coffee in the UK according to Caffeine Informer. So do you wanna tell us how this coffee is actually made?
Yeah, so it mostly comes down to the type of bean that goes into it. So coffee, for those that aren't familiar, it grows on shrubs around the equator, and kind of like wine, where it grows gives it different characteristics. And there's different types of these shrubs, like different species and different like varieties. And broadly speaking, there are two main types of coffee. So you've got Arabica, which you might have heard, you might have seen, like instant coffee says 100% Arabica, and then you've got Robusta coffee. Robusta coffee gets a bit of a bad rep. It's not generally seen as good as Arabica, and quite often they don't taste that nice on their own, but it does have between like 1.8 and 3 times as much caffeine as Arabica. So you will find Robusta beans put into blends of coffee to kind of give it a bit more punch, and it also produces the crema that you'll see on top of the coffee at places like Costa. So so part of it is choosing the right bean. Then once you've got the right bean, it's how you roast it. So the evidence kind of suggests that the longer you roast the coffee, the more caffeine you roast out of it. So a darker roasted coffee, whilst it will taste really strong because it's got that kind of like carbony flavour from being roasted, I liken it to like burning toast. If you burn toast, you taste like the carbon from the toast. The same with coffee. So if you roast it for longer, you get that kind of like dark, bitter taste, but it doesn't necessarily mean more caffeine.
Oh, so the stronger the taste of the coffee, potentially less caffeine.
If it's the same
bean.
You're talking about the same bean.
Yeah,
but the reason that a lot of brands will do the darker roast is so you can't taste the coffee itself. So with all those like coffee trees around the world and the coffee they produce, it's broken down into 2 categories. So you've got speciality coffee and commodity coffee. Okay, so speciality coffee is like the really posh fancy stuff where they grow it to taste a certain way. So you see on a bag of coffee, it will say like, oh, this one has notes of apple or caramel or whatever. That's because it's a expensive coffee bean. Whereas commodity coffee is what goes into like Nescafe Instant, and that's like grown in vast quantities, and all it serves to do is produce a drink that is brown and has some caffeine in it. If that makes sense. So one of those cheap coffees on its own, if you roast it medium, would taste pretty rough. So they roast it darker, so you taste more of the roasting as opposed to the bean. And I think part of the issue in the UK with our understanding of coffee is we grow up drinking instant and pretty naff coffee, and it makes us think, maybe this is why Andy doesn't like coffee, it makes us think coffee has to taste a certain way and be a bit bitter, and it's why we mostly drink it with milk and sugar. Whereas actually when you start experimenting with some of these speciality beans that have been like really carefully produced, like black coffee can taste really nice.
Okay,
that's a very long-winded answer to a short question.
He's just basically slagged me off and said I'm uneducated. Thank you. You must sip from the cafetiere.
No, I think you might have just been given shit coffee and therefore you don't like it, not knowing. It's like, think about craft beer and that. If you'd only ever drunk Foster's or Carling, you thought that's what all beer tasted like, but then you try some of these really nice craft beers in the little 330 milliliter cans, and you're like, oh wow, that beer tastes like jam donuts or
I get you.
Whatever it might be. There's so much more you can do with it if you use better coffee beans.
I mean, that's actually really fascinating, because that's actually cleared up a massive misconception that I believed in, because I always believed in, if the coffee tastes strong, then surely it's going to have a more powerful caffeinated effect to it, and as you said, that's not quite true. And
it might well do though, Tom, just so you're not
so there's a caveat to that, okay.
Because it might be using these Robusta beans, which are more highly caffeinated. So it's still going to be a strong coffee.
Understood.
But if you've got that high caffeine bean, if you roast it a bit lighter, there should be more caffeine retained in it, if that makes sense.
But doesn't necessarily mean that just because it does taste completely strong and burnt, it's not necessarily doesn't automatically going to mean straight away that it's going to be high caffeine.
That's correct. So when you see like strength 6 in a supermarket or strength 5, it just means it's a dark roast. It's just a bit of a marketing ploy that they use.
Because another reason why I asked that is, so when I first got this coffee, so when I first took the maximum charge, I saw it says high caffeine content. So straight away I was thinking this is going to taste strong, strong, what I'm expecting, burnt, and it's actually it's really smooth. As I said, considering I was on 1,200 milligrams of caffeine, I was expecting it to taste like acid, and it wasn't. It was actually really, really smooth. Where I could go and have like a really low quality freeze dried coffee that may taste really strong because I'm getting that bitterness that some cheap coffees have, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be highly caffeinated for performance. But yeah, this was really smooth, really, really surprising.
It took us a while to find the beans, so we sampled quite a few Robusta coffees from different parts of the world, and some of them, honestly, it's like drinking an ashtray that's had hot water tipped into it, and that's why they have a bad rep. Like some of them do taste really bad, but we managed to find one that's grown in Rwanda that tastes pretty decent.
That's pretty cool. Is there also a difference? So I think we spoke before about the brewing process. So does that make, because obviously when people make instant coffee, you literally throw a spoon in, put your milk, whatever, boiling water over the top, mix it, there you go. But obviously with ground coffee, there's more of a brewing. Does that brewing process make a massive difference to taste, or is it just a?
What you mean in terms of instant versus ground, or just if you've got ground coffee?
If you've got ground coffee, how would you? I mean, obviously instant. There's only one way of doing it, isn't there? Really, but I mean, with ground coffee, can you not just pour a bit in and just hope for the best, or is there?
You can. I mean, look, I could bore you to tears for hours about this. I'll try and be brief, but you can just add hot water to ground coffee, give it a few minutes, and the grinds will sink to the bottom, and you can drink it.
Yeah, I don't know. Isn't that like ideal. A Turkish coffee? Isn't that what they do? Is that a similar thing?
That's called cowboy coffee. Turkish coffee is where they use a really, really fine grind,
right?
And they kind of like simmer it in a pan, and then they pour it into a cup and let it settle. So that's one way of doing it, but using ground coffee. But generally with ground coffee there's a few different ways of doing it. So one of them involves filtering it through a paper filter. So that would be like a drip filter machine or one of those little pour overs that you might see people doing. Yeah. So with that, the paper filter is going to take some of the oils out of the coffee, so it's going to taste a bit cleaner. Okay. Or you can do something called immersion, where that's like a cafetiere, where you're keeping the water and the coffee together and then plunging it. So with that, there's going to be like a bit more like dissolved solid, so it will taste like a bit heavier in your mouth. So those sort of two methods will produce really different results. And then the other one, of course, is espresso machine, where you've got really fine ground coffee and you're forcing steam through that coffee under really high pressure, and as it comes through, it extracts like the good stuff.
Yeah.
I want to ask a question quick though, Doug, because I've seen this online, a lot of forums, people asking, can you use medium ground coffee in an espresso machine? I've seen that a lot.
Yeah, it doesn't really work. So you think you're forcing steam through fine ground coffee, it creates like a bit of resistance, and then the pressure means that as it goes through, it's going to like capture all the awesome flavours from the coffee. If it's medium grind, imagine like pouring water through stones.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So the steam's going to come through. It's not going to capture as much the good stuff.
Just like water then, really, but with like a hint of the coffee then is basically.
Yeah, exactly. And then with like the ground coffee, so coffee's got it has oils in it, which gives it the flavour and the caffeine and all that kind of different stuff. And most of them are things you want, some of them are things you don't. And how you brew the coffee affects how much of the good ones you get and how much of the bad ones. So if you use a really coarse grind and just pour water through it, doesn't get enough of the good stuff, so the coffee can actually taste like a bit sour. Whereas if you have a really fine grind and say you make a cafetiere with fine ground coffee and let it just sit there for ages, it takes everything out and that will taste a little bit bitter.
Right. Okay.
So brewing has a massive impact on how the coffee tastes.
This is like being taken back to school, but for actually something I take great interest in, because I've always thought of myself as like a coffee snob. But listening to this, it's like everything I'm doing is actually wrong. Because I've got like a cafetiere, I've got like a coffee ninja. It seems like I've got all the gear, but I've actually got no idea. But I'm actually on cannonballcoffee.co.uk right now, and you've actually got some cool stuff on there that doesn't include things to buy. So you've got like the helpful stuff section there, and you've actually got these like cool little PDF guides, etc. So kind of what Bill was saying about is just like one way to kind of make coffee. Here you've actually got like a PDF guide that guides you through making the perfect brews for an AeroPress, a cafetiere. I see a stove top here, a mocha pot, filter coffee, there's cold brew coffee. So it's like an art form almost.
I mean, I've heard it described by someone who's much more into coffee than I am as sort of part chemistry, part art, and I think I've made it sound I've made it sound really intimidating. It's not. Ultimately, if you get good coffee and some kind of coffee maker, you will have a good experience. Yeah. But this is about making it as good as it could be.
Yeah. I mean, do you have like a preferred way of making it?
Your
Depends on the
process?
occasion.
What's your process for a typical coffee?
I like pour over coffee. But I mean, I've got a shelf of coffee makers, and none of them are that expensive. So I've got like the AeroPress, pour over, cafetiere. It's not like I've got a £6,000 espresso machine or anything.
Yeah.
But I really like pour over, and you can get one of those for like £10, and it takes.
That seems to be really popular at the moment. Pour overs.
But apparently they were big in the 70s. It's just
I mean,
cyclical.
A lot of people, and it's actually a lot of sciencey people that I follow. They set up like a meth lab where they've got their pour over on they've got like 2 different sets of scales, one for milliliters, one for the actual like grind itself as well.
It's like 4 grams of water every 20 seconds or something, and then
I might have to go back to basics here.
But I mean, the beauty of it is, right, it's just fun experimenting and seeing what you enjoy the taste of. Like, I really want to stress that you don't have to have all of that to enjoy good coffee.
No.
Yeah.
But the pour over, it takes like 4 minutes to brew a coffee, which for some people is probably too long.
And that's why instant's so popular, isn't it? Because people were lazy.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been there. Let's be honest. I mean, I want to address something quickly, Duncan. You mentioned to me on a message that you say that instant coffee isn't real coffee. I want to address that because there's obviously such a vast array of instant coffees. I mean, for example, you've got like a supermarket branded one which tastes really poor. But then you've got
Beanies.
Azera. Have you tried the Azera one? It's like the really fine one, which is like a £5 a tin. Is there a difference between them, or are they all the same pretty much?
There actually is. So Azera coffee does have some real coffee in it.
Oh, okay.
Really fine grounds coffee as
it's
well.
Like 5%,
as
isn't it? Is that right?
I don't know exactly, but that will be a bit different. But obviously instant coffees where they've got some really cheap coffee beans, roasted them by like the ton, brewed a load of coffee, concentrated it, and then they've evaporated the water either by freezing it or air drying.
Right.
And I compare instant coffee to like pot noodles. So
right,
pot noodle. People in pot noodles. Like,
you're going to piss off half the army here.
No judgment. But I think instant coffee is to coffee what pot noodle is to food.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
It's like when they cut drugs with baby powder.
Brilliant. God's sake.